New York has always been a symbol of luxury, hustle, and ambition. The skyscrapers cast their shadows over the Hudson River, the dazzling lights of Times Square never sleep, and somewhere amid the city's relentless pace, a man sits in the highest office of the Hawthorne Group financial empire. Ethan Hawthorne, 45 years old, is the CEO of one of New York's leading financial corporations. With his rugged appearance, perfectly tailored suits, and deep blue eyes filled with unspoken stories, Ethan is a man admired by many. Yet beneath the facade of success lies an empty loneliness that has lingered for 2 decades. Under the dim office lights, Ethan stands by the expansive glass window, gazing down at the bustling traffic below. He has it all: wealth, power, and fame. But the one thing he has always yearned for remains out of reach: Elise Sinclair. The day Elise left New York was also the day Ethan realized he had lost the most precious thing in his life. No one understands why a man capable of achieving everything he desires cannot move on from the past. In the drawer of his desk, an old photograph remains, a woman with a gentle smile and soft brown hair. Elise, his first and only love. In stark contrast to New York's fast-paced life, the small town of Vermont is a tranquil haven, secluded from the bustling world. Here, wooden houses nestle under rows of maple trees, cobblestone paths wind alongside gentle streams, and autumn afternoons are always filled with the sweet aroma of ripe apples. Elise Sinclair, now 43, chose this place to rebuild her life after leaving Ethan. As a dedicated pediatrician at St. Mary's Hospital, she devotes most of her time to caring for young patients and participating in community charity work. Elise leads a simple life, but behind her strong facade lies an unspoken pain that has never truly faded. For the past 20 years, she has lived for her son, Liam Sinclair, a 19-year-old with a kind smile and eyes that mirror Ethan's. Liam is Elise's greatest pride, but he is also the reason she can never truly leave the past behind. He grew up surrounded by his mother's love, yet the absence of a father has always left a void in his heart. Elise has always avoided talking about Ethan, but sometimes she catches Liam quietly looking at old photographs or wondering about his origins. However, the peaceful life of mother and son does not last forever. When Liam is diagnosed with leukemia, Elise's entire world comes crashing down. Faced with the harsh reality that her son needs a bone marrow transplant to have a chance at survival, Elise is forced to confront the past she had tried so hard to bury. She knows there is only one person who can save Liam: Ethan Hawthorne, the man she once loved and left behind for 2 long decades. Throughout the difficult years, Elise had always had Helen Grayson by her side, her trusted colleague and closest confidant. Helen, now 48 years old, had witnessed Elise's entire journey, from her earliest struggles to rebuild a new life in Vermont to the moment she faced her greatest fear: losing her son. With her neatly cropped platinum hair and straightforward personality, Helen was Elise's unwavering pillar of strength. She constantly reminded Elise that she needed to confront Ethan, not just to save Liam, but to finally close an unresolved chapter in her life. "Everything will be fine, Elise," Helen would often say, her voice gentle but resolute. "You've been running for too long. It's time you face Ethan, not for yourself, but for your son." Helen's words echoed in Elise's mind, keeping her awake on countless nights. She couldn't stop wondering how Ethan would react upon learning of Liam's existence. Would he resent her? Would he turn his back on their son? But no matter what his reaction might be, Elise knew she had no other choice. She had to pick up the phone and call the man she had been avoiding for the past 20 years. Meanwhile, in New York, Ethan continued to bury himself in work, unaware that hundreds of miles away in a small town, his biological son was fighting a cruel battle against illness. All his achievements seemed meaningless without Elise by his side. Every night he would sit alone in his hotel room, gazing down at the glittering city lights and thinking of Elise's gentle eyes, the eyes that once held all his dreams. To Ethan, Elise was not just his first love. She was the person who had stood by him through his toughest days. She was the only one who truly understood the deepest corners of his soul. Yet she had left without a single explanation. Since the day Elise left, Ethan had never been able to love anyone else. Every fleeting relationship only served as a painful reminder that no one could ever replace her. And now, when Elise's unexpected call echoed through the quiet of the night, Ethan knew this might be his only chance to reclaim the woman he had never stopped loving. "I'll be there right away," Ethan said, his voice deep yet resolute. He didn't know what awaited him in Vermont, but there was one thing he was certain of. He wouldn't let Elise slip away again. Welcome to today's story on Soul Stories. Let us know which city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss another meaningful story. Chapter 1. The Youthful Love and Separation. New York, on a chilly autumn afternoon, golden leaves blanketed the cobblestone streets. In a large lecture hall at Columbia University, Ethan Hawthorne, a highly ambitious economics student, listened intently to a lecture on global finance. Beside him, Elise Sinclair, a young woman with gentle brown eyes and soft brown hair cascading over her shoulders, was eagerly taking notes in her notebook. They first met at a financial seminar that year, where Ethan, with his innate confidence, left a strong impression on the panel by asking sharp questions about business strategies. Elise, then a medical student, attended the seminar out of curiosity, never expecting to be captivated by a young man so intelligent and full of ambition like Ethan. After the seminar, as Elise struggled to find her way back to the dormitory amidst the bustling crowd, Ethan appeared beside her, smiling with a sparkle in his eyes. "Are you lost?" Elise smiled, her cheeks flushed pink. "Perhaps. New York is bigger than I thought." That was the beginning of a love story that seemed like a dream. They quickly became close. Ethan was drawn to Elise's kindness and gentle nature, while Elise admired his resilience, intelligence, and decisiveness. They spent many afternoons together strolling through Central Park, talking about their dreams and future plans. Elise often shared her aspiration to become a pediatrician and help children with serious illnesses, while Ethan never ceased to talk about his ambition to build a powerful financial empire. Despite coming from two different worlds, they shared a sincere love for each other. Ethan often surprised Elise with small gestures, like a bouquet of flowers from a street vendor or a hot cup of coffee when she had to stay up late studying. In return, Elise reminded Ethan of the beauty in simple things, encouraging him to take time for himself rather than immersing entirely in work. Their university years passed in happiness. Ethan gradually built a solid foundation for his career with his first startup company, while Elise graduated with honors and started working at a prestigious hospital in New York. Despite their busy schedules, they always made time for each other, cherishing the quiet moments amidst the bustling city. But then, everything started to change. Ethan's career soared rapidly after his company successfully secured a major investment. Work gradually consumed more of his time, and romantic dinners were increasingly replaced by endless meetings. Elise began to feel lost in their relationship, as she often found herself dining alone, and the once frequent affectionate messages became sparse. She loved Ethan with all her heart, but it seemed his ambitions were pushing them further apart. She missed the days when Ethan would hold her hand as they walked down streets covered in golden leaves, or the quiet evenings they spent watching an old movie together. Now, all those moments were just memories. Elise tried to understand and be patient, but she couldn't deny the growing loneliness inside her. Then one fateful day, the letter arrived. On a cold winter evening, Elise received an envelope with no sender's name. Inside were photos of Ethan intimately dining with an unfamiliar woman at an upscale restaurant, accompanied by cryptic words hinting that Ethan had moved on. "He has found someone else." The cold words on the paper shattered Elise's heart. The sender was none other than Victor Ramsey, Ethan's business rival, someone who had always envied Ethan's success and sought to destroy him by targeting the one thing that mattered most, their relationship. But Elise had no way of knowing this. Doubt and heartbreak flooded Elise as she desperately tried to reach Ethan again and again. She texted, called, and even left worried voicemails, but all she received in return was a suffocating silence. The phone in her hand felt colder with every unanswered call, and the dreams of their happy future slowly crumbled with each passing day. Elise had once believed their love could overcome any obstacle. that Ethan would always be by her side just as he had promised. But now, standing alone in the apartment, once filled with their laughter, she felt nothing but emptiness. Ethan had vanished, no explanation, no reply. She told herself countless times that he was simply busy, that he would return soon and explain everything. But as the days turned into weeks, Elise's hope faded, replaced by the painful belief that he had chosen someone else. His silence was like a sharp blade cutting through her heart, leading her to believe their love no longer mattered to him. Sitting by the window, gazing at the bustling New York streets below, Elise felt hollow. She loved Ethan too much to force him into a choice. She was terrified that if she confronted him, she would hear the answer she dreaded the most. A part of her still longed for an explanation, but another part couldn't bear to hurt herself any further. After days of torment and heartbreak, Elise made a decision that would change her life forever. She left New York, the apartment they had built together, and took with her a secret Ethan had never known, their unborn child. On a misty morning, Elise packed her belongings in silence. Every object in the apartment reminded her of Ethan, of the beautiful moments they once shared. But now those memories felt distant and faded. She left a final letter on the table, hoping that when Ethan returned, he would read it and understand. The words were simple but filled with unspoken sorrow. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I can't wait any longer. I wish you happiness." With a small suitcase in hand, Elise took a deep breath, her eyes blurred with tears. She took one last look at the apartment that had once been their home, then stepped through the door, carrying with her a broken heart and the tiny life growing inside her. Under the snow-covered streets, Elise walked away without looking back, tears streaming down her face. She loved Ethan, but her trust had been shattered beyond repair. She believed she needed a fresh start, a place where she could raise her child without facing the ghosts of her past. Ethan returned home after a long business trip, eager to share his exciting news with Elise, but all he found was an empty apartment and the letter she had left behind. His world collapsed before his eyes. He frantically searched for her, making hundreds of calls, but there was no answer. From that day on, Ethan withdrew into himself, pouring all his energy into work. But deep down, he knew he had lost the most important thing in his life. For 20 years, Ethan didn't love anyone else. He threw himself into his career, achieving success, but his heart remained empty. In the quiet of his office late at night, he often wondered if Elise was happy somewhere, if she ever thought about him. Chapter 2. Elise's new life and Ethan's absence. Vermont, a serene small town embraced by lush green mountains and endless fields. This was where Elise Sinclair chose to start over after leaving New York. Gone were the towering skyscrapers and the relentless pace of city life. Vermont offered her the tranquility and a fresh start she believed she and her unborn child desperately needed. The first days in Vermont were anything but easy. Elise arrived with nothing but her own determination, no family, no friends to share the burdens weighing heavily on her heart. But she refused to let herself fall apart. She quickly found a job at St. Mary's Hospital, where children needed her dedicated care. As a pediatrician, Elise devoted every day to treating and nurturing young patients, finding solace and purpose in her work. The small house on the edge of the forest became the place where she and her son, Liam, built their lives together. The day Liam was born, Elise knew she had found a new light in her life. He had the same deep blue eyes, eyes that she could never forget, Ethan's eyes. From the moment she first held him in her arms, Elise swore she would do everything to give Liam a happy life, even without his father by his side. Under the Vermont sky, Elise and Liam grew together in peace. On winter mornings, Elise would take Liam out to play in the snow-covered fields, teaching him how to build snowmen and playing with the neighbors' puppies. In the summers, they spent time fishing by the gentle streams and reading books together in their cozy living room. Elise had become everything to Liam, not just his mother, but his best friend. But no matter how busy she kept herself, the memories of Ethan continued to haunt her. On long, lonely nights when Liam was fast asleep, Elise would often find herself gazing out of the window, reminiscing about the beautiful moments they had shared. She wondered if Ethan had ever searched for her. Did he regret betraying her? Did he hate her for leaving without an explanation? She remembered their warm embraces as they watched the dazzling lights of New York together, the way he whispered promises of forever into her ear. But the past was the past, and what was lost could never be recovered. Elise constantly reassured herself that leaving Ethan had been the right choice for both of them. Yet sometimes in her dreams, she found herself back in his arms, laughing together as if nothing had changed. Meanwhile, Ethan had never forgotten her. Back in New York, Ethan Hawthorne had become one of the city's most successful CEOs. The Hawthorne Group flourished under his leadership, securing multi-million-dollar deals and expanding its influence on a global scale. To the outside world, Ethan was the epitome of perfection, intelligent, decisive, and unstoppable in his pursuit of success. But only he knew of the emptiness that success could never fill. Every morning, Ethan threw himself into work, endless meetings, negotiations, and deadlines. He did everything to keep himself busy, to avoid thinking about Elise. But no matter how hard he tried, she was always there in the back of his mind. A photo of Elise still lay hidden in the drawer of his desk, away from prying eyes. Sometimes late at night, when whiskey failed to numb the ache inside him, he would quietly open it and gaze at the face of the woman he had once loved with all his heart. No fleeting relationships, no high society gatherings could ever replace her absence. Ethan had searched for her, hoping that one day she would return, but Elise had disappeared without a trace. He couldn't understand why she had left, why their love had ended in such painful silence. The unanswered questions haunted him for 20 years. While Ethan drowned in his loneliness in New York, Liam grew up in Vermont with unanswered questions of his own. He was a bright, compassionate young man who had inherited the best qualities from both his parents. Every time he asked about his father, Elise would simply smile and say that his father was a good man, but they could not be together for reasons she couldn't explain. Liam never resented his mother, but deep inside he longed to know the truth, to understand why his father had never been a part of his life. Time passed and Elise continued her life in Vermont, but every time she looked at Liam, an ache stirred deep within her. He bore too many of Ethan's features, from his piercing eyes and confident stride to the resolute gestures that were unmistakably his father's. And deep down, she knew she couldn't keep Liam confined in their small, sheltered world forever. Then one day, the news she had always feared arrived, a devastating diagnosis from the hospital. Liam had leukemia and needed a bone marrow transplant. In that moment, Elise's world crumbled around her. The nightmare she had dreaded for years had become a reality, and this time, she knew she couldn't face it alone. Standing in Liam's hospital room, watching her son lying pale and fragile on the hospital bed, Elise realized she needed Ethan. No matter how painful it was to return to New York, no matter how many old wounds would resurface, she was willing to do whatever it took to save her son. Chapter 3. The Fateful Call. In the hospital room, bathed in the soft afternoon light, Elise sat beside Liam's bed, clutching his frail hand tightly. The machines around them emitted a steady rhythm, but to her, every beep sounded like a painful reminder that time was slipping away. Liam, the son she loved more than anything in the world, was battling a relentless enemy, leukemia. At first, she had hoped it was just exhaustion from his studies, but the test results had shattered that fragile hope. The doctors had told her that Liam needed a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible, and no one in Elise's family was a match. Their only hope now lay with the one person who could save him, his biological father, Ethan Hawthorne. A flood of memories pulled Elise back to the past, to the emotions she had buried deep for 20 years. Her hands trembled as she flipped through an old address book where Ethan's phone number had remained untouched in a corner, as if waiting for this very moment. She had considered calling him countless times before, but fear and pride had always held her back. But now, with Liam's life hanging in the balance, she had no other choice. Taking a deep breath, she hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button. Meanwhile, in the heart of New York City, Ethan Hawthorne sat in the top-floor office of Hawthorne Group, his eyes fixed on the computer screen, though his mind wandered far away. Business was thriving, deals were closing, but the emptiness inside him only grew stronger. He was used to high-stakes meetings and billion-dollar negotiations, but he had never grown accustomed to the loneliness that crept in each night. The sudden ringing of his phone pulled him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the unknown number flashing on the screen. After a brief hesitation, he answered. That voice, soft, familiar, and unforgettable. Elise? On the other end, her shaky breathing echoed through the line, and with just a few words, Ethan knew something serious was happening. Ethan, I need you. 3 simple words, yet they tore down every wall he had built over the past 2 decades. Her voice, still gentle yet filled with desperation, made his heart pound. Elise, what's going on? He asked urgently, gripping the phone tighter, his mind racing with 100 possibilities. It's my son. No, our son, Ethan. He's very sick. Liam needs a bone marrow transplant, and you might be his only hope. Ethan froze. He could hardly believe what he had just heard. She had said our son? A child he had never known existed for 20 years? The world seemed to tilt beneath him. Our son? His voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. Yes. I'm sorry for disturbing your life, Elise whispered, tears streaming down her face. But Ethan, we're running out of time. Liam needs you. Without a moment's hesitation, Ethan shot up from his chair, his piercing blue eyes filled with a newfound determination. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Cancel all my meetings today. Book me the earliest flight to Vermont. His assistant, accustomed to Ethan's sudden decisions, nodded without question. Ethan hung up and turned back to the call, his voice firm and unwavering. I'm coming to Vermont right now. Send me the hospital address. I'll do whatever it takes to save our son. On the other end, Elise sobbed in relief. She had been unsure of how Ethan would react, but now she realized that despite everything, despite the years of pain and separation, Ethan was still the man she once loved, and the only one who could save their son. After the call, Ethan stood by the towering glass window of his skyscraper office, gazing down at the bustling city below. His heart was a storm of emotions, shock, anger at the secrets that had been kept from him, but above all, an overwhelming sense of concern. He had a son, a truth that had been hidden from him for 2 decades. With just one phone call, everything had changed. Ethan was no longer the cold, work-obsessed CEO who lived for business deals and boardroom battles. Now he was a father about to confront the past that had been buried for too long. On the flight to Vermont, seated in the first-class cabin, Ethan stared out of the airplane window, the lights of the city fading into the distance. Memories of Elise flooded his mind, her gentle smile, the way she used to laugh, and the love they had once shared. A love he had never truly moved on from. A mixture of confusion and anxiety coursed through him, but underneath it all was an unwavering determination. He didn't know how Elise would react when she saw him again, or how he would begin to build a connection with the son he had never known. But one thing was clear: he wouldn't let this opportunity slip away. He would do whatever it took to save his son and perhaps find a way back to the woman he had never stopped loving. At St. Mary's Hospital, Vermont. Meanwhile, in a quiet hospital room bathed in soft evening light, Elise stood silently by Liam's bedside, hope flickering in her eyes. She knew Ethan was on his way, and for the first time in 20 years, she no longer felt alone. Leaning down, she whispered gently into her son's ear, "You're going to meet your father soon, Liam." Liam gave her a faint smile, his face pale but his eyes filled with curiosity. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense the anticipation in his mother's voice. And so fate had once again brought Ethan and Elise back together. This time, it wasn't just about love. It was about the life of the son they had created together, a bond that neither time nor distance could break. Chapter 4. Confronting the Past. Ethan strode quickly down the hospital corridor, the sound of his polished leather shoes echoing with each determined step on the white-tiled floor. His heart pounded in his chest as the door to room 312 swung open. There, sitting beside the hospital bed, was Elise, the woman who had haunted his thoughts for the past 20 years. She held the frail hand of a young man, his son. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the boy. The tousled brown hair, the pale yet resilient expression, and those eyes. His eyes. Elise looked up at the sound of his footsteps. The moment their eyes met, both were frozen in place. Time had changed many things, but some remained untouched. Pain, regret, and something unspoken that lingered between them. Ethan clenched his fists, his voice low, but laced with the hurt he'd buried for so long. "You kept this from me for 20 years?" Elise took a deep breath, exhaustion evident in her gaze but her resolve unwavering. She stood up, taking a tentative step toward him, her voice soft but sincere. "Ethan, I'm sorry for disrupting your life. I know this might turn everything upside down for you, but I had no other choice." Her words were like a dagger to his heart. Ethan studied her, countless questions flooding his mind, but only one escaped his lips. "Why, Elise? Why didn't you tell me?" Elise bit her lip, pain flickering in her eyes, pain he couldn't decipher. But instead of an explanation, she simply shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, now is not the time to talk about the past. Liam, our son needs you." Ethan turned his attention to Liam, who was watching them with tired yet sharp eyes. Slowly, he stepped closer to the hospital bed, his voice softening. "Liam, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." Liam's expression faltered, his eyes scanning the man before him, the stranger who claimed to be his father. His voice was weak but filled with skepticism. "You're my father?" Ethan nodded, his gaze steady and sincere. "Yes, I am. And I will do whatever it takes to help you." Liam glanced at his mother, uncertainty clouding his features. Elise squeezed his hand gently, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I kept this from you for too long, but now we need to focus on making you well again." Turning to the doctor standing nearby, Ethan's tone shifted to one of authority. "What do I need to do? How soon can we begin the tests?" The doctor nodded and gestured for the nurses to prepare the necessary procedures. Elise exhaled a shaky breath, watching Ethan's immediate resolve. He was still the same, strong, decisive, and unwilling to abandon those he cared about. As Ethan left the room for the tests, Elise sat back down beside Liam, tears welling in her eyes yet holding steady. "I know you're upset, but Ethan, your father, is our only hope now." Liam closed his eyes, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He had spent 19 years without a father, never needing one until now. And now this man had suddenly appeared, claiming to care. Ethan sat still as the nurse drew his blood, his mind racing between past and present. The loneliness of the past 20 years, the countless nights he'd stared out of his office window, wondering where Elise had gone. Now everything was coming to light. She had been right here, raising their son alone. After the tests were done, Ethan returned to Liam's room, his gaze never leaving Elise. His voice was firm, yet filled with something deeper. "No matter what the results are, I'm not going anywhere." Elise nodded silently, tears rolling down her cheeks. She had no choice but to trust Ethan, the man she once loved and left behind. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, waiting for the results, time seemed to slow down. Elise glanced at Ethan. He was still the same in so many ways. A part of her felt relief that he was here, but another part was terrified. What if, once everything was over, he decided to walk away again? Ethan, too, was lost in thought, countless questions still unanswered. But for now, there was only one thing that mattered: saving his son. And as the hospital room door quietly closed behind them, both Elise and Ethan knew this journey was no longer just about an illness. It was about their past, their mistakes, and the possibility of a future none of them had dared to imagine. Chapter 5: The Journey to Healing and the Unveiling of Truth. In the quiet hospital room, the steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that filled the air. Liam was asleep, his pale face peaceful despite the battle raging within him. Soft light from the window cast gentle shadows, illuminating Elise and Ethan sitting across from each other, divided by a distance that 20 years of separation had only made wider. Elise hesitated, her eyes fixed on her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but laden with emotion. How has your life been?" Ethan was momentarily taken aback by her question. He studied Elise for a long moment, searching for the right words. Busy, successful, but incredibly empty. I have everything: power, wealth, influence, but I don't have you. Elise bit her lip, her gaze drifting away. She wasn't sure whether his answer made her heart ache or brought her relief. After a pause, she sighed and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ethan. I shouldn't have disrupted your life." Ethan frowned, his voice growing heavier with frustration. "Elise, why do you say that? Do you think I've forgotten you? Do you think my life has been fine since you left?" Elise clenched her hands tighter, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but I thought you deserved a better life. One without me." Ethan's expression hardened, his blue eyes reflecting both pain and anger. "Why did you leave, Elise? Do you have any idea how many years I searched for you? How many nights I lay awake wondering what I did wrong for you to disappear without a word?" Elise took a deep breath, her eyes filled with sadness as they met his. I didn't want you to have to choose between me and that woman. I saw the letter, Ethan, the photos. I knew you had someone else, and I knew you had stopped loving me." Her words were like a blade cutting through Ethan's heart. His eyes widened in shock and pain. "What woman, Elise? What are you talking about?" Elise's lips trembled and her voice wavered. "I received a letter saying you were involved with someone else. You were always away on business, and the photos, I couldn't help but believe it. I tried reaching out to you, Ethan. I called, I texted, but there was only silence. I was afraid to confront you because I didn't want to hear the truth." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. "God, Elise, you left me because of a letter? You never even asked me? Never gave me a chance to explain? I was in the middle of finalizing the biggest deal of my career, and I admit I neglected you. But I thought once it was done, I'd make it up to you. When I came back, you were gone." Elise's eyes welled with tears. "I was terrified, Ethan. I wanted to hear your explanation, but I was too afraid you'd confirm what I feared most. I didn't want to force you to choose, and I didn't want to be the one left behind." Ethan shook his head, disappointment clear in his eyes. "Elise, you were always the only one in my heart. I never betrayed you. Everything you saw, it was all a setup, a lie, and you walked away without knowing the truth. I searched for you everywhere. I never loved anyone else, Elise." Elise looked down, her voice breaking. "I know. I realize now that I made a terrible mistake, and I've lived with that regret every day for the past 20 years. Ethan sighed, his gaze softening as he saw the guilt and pain in her eyes. He stepped closer, his voice gentler but unwavering. "Elise, if you had just asked me, if you had stayed and confronted me, we wouldn't have wasted all these years, and you took my son with you." Elise turned to look at Liam, still asleep, and the regret in her eyes deepened. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I thought I was protecting you, protecting myself. I thought telling you the truth would ruin everything you'd built." Ethan reached out, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder, his touch both firm and comforting. "Elise, nothing could have ruined my life more than losing you and our son." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sound of Liam's breathing. Elise gazed into Ethan's eyes, and for the first time in 20 years, she saw the unwavering love and honesty she had once known. A while later, Ethan stepped out into the hospital hallway, pulling out his phone and dialing his trusted assistant. "Jack, I need you to track down everything related to the letters Elise received 20 years ago. Find out who was behind them." Within a few days, the results were in. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the name on the report, Victor Ramsey, a name he knew all too well. Victor had once been his fiercest rival in the industry, always seeking ways to undermine him, both professionally and personally. And now it was clear that the letters were part of Victor's elaborate scheme to destroy both Ethan's career and his love. With determination burning in his chest, Ethan returned to the hospital, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and pain. He placed the file in front of Elise, his voice cold but laced with undeniable hurt. "Do you believe me now? This is proof that Victor orchestrated everything to tear us apart. The woman you saw in those photos was just a business partner in a crucial deal. You never asked me, Elise. You never gave me the chance to explain. Elise's hands trembled as she picked up the stack of documents, her eyes scanning each page. Every word felt like a dagger piercing through her heart. The forged letters, the meticulously planned deception, everything was laid out in stark clarity before her. Her voice was barely above a whisper, choked with regret. Ethan, I don't know what to say. Ethan watched her, his expression softening slightly as he saw the overwhelming remorse reflected in her eyes. The hospital room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of 2 decades of misunderstanding pressing down on them. Elise's heart ached with guilt, but one thing remained clear. Ethan was still here, still standing by her side, still willing to fight for their son. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and grasped his hand tightly, her voice trembling but sincere. Ethan, I'm sorry. I was wrong not to trust you, but we can't change the past now. The only thing that matters is saving our son. Her fingers tightened around his, and for the first time in 20 years, she didn't feel alone anymore. Outside the hospital window, the city lights continued to shine brightly, but inside this small room, a new glimmer of hope had just been ignited. In the days that followed, an atmosphere of tension mixed with hope lingered in the hospital. Ethan was determined to make up for the years he had lost, but Liam was not ready to easily accept a father who had suddenly appeared in his life. He maintained a certain distance, responding with short, cautious replies, but Ethan refused to be discouraged. One crisp morning, Ethan knocked gently on the hospital room door. Elise was preparing Liam's medication while the boy sat by the window, gazing thoughtfully at the hospital garden. Liam, Ethan said softly, would you like to take a walk outside? Just the two of us. Liam hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering toward his mother as if seeking permission. Elise offered him an encouraging smile, and after a brief pause, he gave a small nod. They walked along the narrow path around the hospital grounds, surrounded by the rustling maple trees. Ethan matched his pace with Liam's, occasionally glancing at his son, searching for the right words to break the invisible barrier between them. When I was your age, Ethan began, I used to take walks like this too. But back then, I was always thinking about work and how to succeed. I wasn't very good at appreciating the little things. Liam remained silent, but his expression softened slightly. He kicked a small pebble on the path and muttered, what about now? Ethan smiled, his voice filled with sincerity. Now I realize that these moments are the most important. Liam hesitated before asking, then why didn't you ever look for Mom and me? Ethan stopped walking, regret flickering in his eyes. He turned to his son and said gently, I did look for you and your mom, for years, but your mother was good at hiding, and I never knew I had a son. Liam looked at Ethan, and for the first time, he saw something genuine, something that spoke of pain, longing, and remorse. He took a deep breath and nodded silently. So, are you going to leave again? Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's smile was steady, his eyes filled with quiet hope. I'll do everything I can to stay. In the days that followed, Ethan made a concerted effort to spend more time with Liam. They sat together in the hospital room, reading books, with Ethan attentively listening as Liam spoke about his passion for photography and his dream of becoming a travel photographer. Ethan was amazed by his son's creativity and determination, and he didn't hesitate to encourage him. You're really talented, Liam. I have a friend in the publishing industry. If you'd like, I can introduce you to learn more. Liam shrugged, but a flicker of interest shone in his eyes. Maybe. It's worth a shot. Gradually, their walks became a regular occurrence. One afternoon, Ethan surprised Liam with a new camera. They captured simple moments together, wildflowers growing along the path, sunlight filtering through the leaves, and even raindrops trickling down the hospital window. One day, as Ethan watched Liam snapping photos in the garden, the boy suddenly spoke up. You're not as bad as I thought you were. Ethan turned to him, warmth filling his gaze. Thank you, Liam. I know I've missed out on so much, but I hope I still have a chance to be your father. Liam stared at his camera screen before looking up at Ethan. What can you do now? Without hesitation, Ethan replied, I can stay. I'll be here. I'll fight alongside you, dream with you, and I won't leave again. Ethan's words stirred something deep inside Liam. Though he said nothing, a newfound trust was beginning to take root, a trust that had never existed before. As the day of the surgery approached, Elise noticed the growing bond between Ethan and Liam. She quietly stood in the corner of the hospital room, watching them talk, share, and laugh together. The sight filled her heart with both warmth and regret. Regret that Ethan had missed the most important years of their son's life. One evening after Liam had fallen asleep, Ethan stepped out onto the hospital balcony where Elise was already standing. He approached her silently, and for a moment, they both gazed at the shimmering city lights in the distance. Do you see it? Ethan whispered, his voice gentle yet resolute. Even if it's late, I can still be a good father. Elise turned to him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of emotions she could hardly put into words. You're doing a great job, Ethan. I truly appreciate it. Ethan held her gaze, his voice filled with quiet longing. Elise, I don't just want to be Liam's father. I want to be a part of your life too, if you'll let me. Elise looked away, her eyes drifting towards the distant horizon. Let's focus on Liam first, Ethan. When all of this is over, we'll talk about it. Ethan nodded, understanding that the road ahead would still hold challenges, but at least now he had regained a part of the family he had lost. In the following days, they spent more time together as a family. Ethan took care of Liam attentively, helping him with light exercises to keep his strength up for the surgery. Elise watched all of this with a sense of longing, an unfamiliar but comforting warmth that she had secretly yearned for all these years. One afternoon, just a day before the surgery, Liam looked at both Elise and Ethan with a quiet determination in his eyes. I know you're both worried, he said with a reassuring smile, but I'll be okay, because I have both of you by my side. Liam's simple words struck deep, and Elise and Ethan couldn't hide their emotions. They exchanged a glance, and for the first time in years, they felt whole, like a real family. They knew the greatest challenge was yet to come, but at least for now they had each other. And that, more than anything, was the hope they needed to move forward. Chapter 7. The Crucial Surgery. The day of the surgery had finally arrived. The hospital was filled with an atmosphere of tension and anxiety. Bright fluorescent lights illuminated the long corridors. The sharp scent of antiseptic lingered in the air, and doctors and nurses hurried past, each focused on their tasks. Outside Liam's hospital room, Elise stood still, her heart heavy with worry, eyes fixed on the door where Ethan and Liam were talking inside. Inside the room, Liam sat on the hospital bed, his face pale, yet his eyes brimming with hope. Ethan sat beside him, his hand firmly holding Liam's cold fingers, as if trying to transfer his strength to his son. You'll be fine, Liam, Ethan said, his voice deep but laced with a tremor he couldn't suppress. I promise you, I won't leave you again. This time, I'm staying. Forever. Liam gave a faint smile, his grip tightening just a little. I believe you, Liam whispered, his voice filled with trust. But I just wish you had been here sooner. Ethan took a deep breath, the pain that had been lingering in his heart stirring once again. I know, Ethan replied softly, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Elise stepped into the room, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but her voice remained calm and reassuring. Liam, are you ready? The doctors will be here any moment to take you in. Liam nodded, his gaze shifting between his mother and father. I'm ready, he said with a faint but determined smile. A nurse entered with a gurney, her expression kind yet professional. Ethan and Elise walked alongside Liam as he was wheeled down the corridor towards the operating room. At the door, Ethan leaned down, pressing a soft kiss on Liam's forehead, his voice choked with emotion. I love you, Liam. Elise squeezed her son's hand tightly, whispering, I'll be right here waiting for you, my love. The doors to the operating room closed, leaving Elise and Ethan standing outside, an overwhelming emptiness settling over them. Elise placed a trembling hand over her heart, feeling its erratic beats of worry and fear. Ethan gently rested his hand on her shoulder, offering silent reassurance. We'll get through this, Elise, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Liam is stronger than we think. Elise looked at him, and for the first time in years, the resentment she had held on to seemed to fade away, replaced by hope and trust. Chapter 6. The Crucial Surgery. Time seemed to crawl at an agonizing pace. Elise and Ethan sat in the waiting room, every passing second testing their patience and endurance. Ethan paced back and forth, his hands clenching and unclenching unconsciously. Elise sat still, her eyes fixed on the closed doors of the operating room, her mind racing with a whirlwind of thoughts. Finally, the doors swung open. The doctor stepped out with a slight smile on his face, his gaze gentle as he looked at Elise and Ethan. The surgery was successful, the doctor announced. The bone marrow transplant went well, and Liam is now being monitored in the recovery room. However, his recovery will take time and require special care. Tears streamed down Elise's face uncontrollably. Ethan let out a deep sigh of relief, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Without hesitation, he reached for Elise's hand, forgetting all the pain and misunderstandings that had stood between them in the past. "Thank God," Elise choked out. "Thank you, doctor," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. They were allowed into the recovery room to see Liam. The boy lay on the hospital bed, still connected to several medical devices, but his face looked more peaceful than before. Elise sat down beside him, holding his hand gently and whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart." Ethan took a seat on the other side, his eyes filled with love and pride. "I'm here too, Liam. I promise I won't leave again." Liam slowly opened his eyes, his voice weak but his smile radiant. I know," he murmured. The following days were filled with challenges. Liam's recovery was arduous, requiring constant monitoring, numerous tests, and dealing with bouts of exhaustion and discomfort. Yet through it all, Ethan and Elise stood by his side, putting aside their past conflicts for the sake of their son. Ethan learned to handle even the smallest tasks, helping Liam eat, assisting him in sitting up, and staying awake through the long, sleepless nights by his bedside. Elise, too, gradually grew accustomed to Ethan's presence, realizing that he had genuinely changed. He was becoming the father Liam needed. One evening, as Elise sat exhausted in the chair beside Liam's bed, Ethan gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. She stirred slightly, opening her eyes to meet his gaze, filled with tenderness and concern. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of comfort. "Thank you, Ethan," she whispered. Ethan smiled softly, his voice deep and sincere. "I've missed too much, Elise," he said. "I don't want to miss anything anymore." His words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, Elise felt that maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. One afternoon, while Ethan was helping Liam walk around the hospital corridor, Liam suddenly looked up at him and said, "Dad, I think I'm really lucky." Ethan raised an eyebrow, curious. "Lucky? Why do you say that?" Liam smiled faintly. "Because even though it's late, I finally have you by my side." Ethan felt a lump in his throat, overwhelmed with emotion. He knelt down and embraced his son tightly, silently vowing that he would never let anything come between them again. Are you still following the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Chapter 7. Rekindling Love. In the weeks following Liam's surgery, the family gradually settled into a new rhythm of life. The initial anxiety had given way to hope. Liam grew stronger each day, and the relationship between Ethan and Elise also took a positive turn. Ethan, who had once buried himself in endless work, now devoted most of his time to Elise and their son. He made the bold decision to step back from his responsibilities at Hawthorne Group to prioritize his family. Initially, the board of directors opposed his decision, but Ethan remained resolute. "I've sacrificed too much for my career. It's time I focus on what truly matters, my family." Elise silently observed the changes in him. Ethan was no longer the ambitious young man she once knew. He was now a mature man, willing to give up everything to start anew. The realization touched her deeply. One late afternoon, Elise stood in the backyard garden, the place she often retreated to when she needed to think. The small garden, with blooming lavender bushes and a wooden swing, had witnessed her innermost thoughts for the past 20 years. As she watched the golden hues of the sunset paint the sky, Memories of the past flooded her mind. Suddenly, familiar footsteps echoed behind her. Ethan approached, holding a bouquet of white roses. Elise looked at him, her eyes filled with surprise. "White roses," Ethan smiled. "Your favorite." Elise took the bouquet, a soft smile forming on her lips. "You still remember?" Ethan nodded, his deep blue eyes sincere. "I've always remembered, Elise." They stood in silence for a moment, and then Ethan took a deep breath, his expression growing serious. He knelt before her and pulled out a small red velvet box from his pocket. As he opened it, a delicate diamond ring shimmered inside, the very ring he had kept for 20 years. Elise covered her mouth, her eyes wide with astonishment. "I've held on to this ring for 2 decades, Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I once planned to give it to you on the day you disappeared from my life. I was angry, heartbroken, but now I understand that some things can't be undone." He gazed into her eyes, the sunset casting a golden glow over them. "Elise, I can't change the past, but I can choose how we live today and in the future. I want to be with you and Liam, to build a new life together. Will you give me that chance?" Elise stood frozen, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She had dreamed of this moment countless times, hoping that one day Ethan would come back, but she never imagined it could truly happen. "Ethan, are you sure?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We've lost so much time." Ethan smiled gently, his eyes filled with unwavering determination. "We haven't lost it, Elise. We just have a late start. But late is better than never." Elise let out a soft laugh through her tears, nodding, and Ethan tenderly slipped the ring onto her finger. "So, is that a yes?" he asked. "Yes," Elise whispered, her voice breaking with happiness. Ethan stood up and pulled her into his arms. In that moment, all the pain and misunderstandings melted away. They were just two people who had taken the long way back to each other. From the living room window, Liam watched his parents with a quiet smile. He didn't say a word, but deep down, he felt happiness slowly returning to their family. He had once thought that his parents could never reunite, but now he saw that miracles could happen. That evening, Ethan, Elise, and Liam sat around the dinner table, experiencing a true sense of family for the first time. Ethan served Elise her favorite dish, while Liam teased them with playful remarks. "It's great to see you two finally admitting your feelings," Liam chuckled, his eyes twinkling. Elise smiled warmly. "How does it feel to finally have a complete family, Liam?" Liam shrugged, but his smile betrayed his true feelings. "I think I'm pretty lucky." Ethan looked at his son, then at Elise, and reached for her hand under the table. "We're all lucky, Elise, because we found our way back to each other just in time." Elise squeezed his hand, a renewed sense of hope filling her heart. For the first time in 20 years, she felt a deep sense of peace. And so, a new beginning unfolded for them. One without regrets, but filled with love and hope for the future. Chapter 8. A New Happiness. After Liam had fully recovered, Ethan and Elise decided to leave the bustling life of New York behind and embark on a new chapter in Vermont, the place where Elise had spent the past 20 years. They chose a cozy little house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a vast garden and towering maple trees that transformed into brilliant shades of red and gold each autumn. The house exuded a sense of warmth and tranquility, an ideal haven after years of separation and longing. Each morning, Ethan and Elise would take leisurely walks along the winding trails by the lake, breathing in the crisp, fresh air and savoring the peaceful moments together. Ethan had never imagined that he could find such simple happiness. No more relentless work schedules, no more back-to-back meetings, just quiet dinners by candlelight and tender mornings with Elise by his side. Liam, having recovered from his illness, made a life-changing decision. He wanted to pursue a career in medicine to help those facing the same battle he once fought. He began spending time at the local hospital, talking to patients, offering encouragement, and sharing his journey with those who were going through similar struggles. One evening, as the family sat together in their cozy living room, Liam spoke up. "I've thought about it a lot, and I want to become a doctor, not just to help others, but to give back for the second chance at life I've been given. Elise's eyes welled with pride as she gazed at her son, while Ethan placed a supportive hand on Liam's shoulder. I believe you'll make an incredible doctor, son, and I'll always support you in every step of the way. But Liam wasn't the only one with a newfound purpose. Ethan, too, decided to do something meaningful with his life. He used a portion of his wealth to establish the Hawthorne Hope Foundation, a charity dedicated to supporting leukemia patients. The foundation aimed to assist families struggling with the financial burden of bone marrow transplants and long-term treatments. At the foundation's launch event, Ethan stood before the press and spoke with heartfelt sincerity. I've lost so much in my life, but I believe we all have the opportunity to make things right. This foundation is not just a promise to my son, it's a beacon of hope for every family fighting this cruel disease. Elise stood quietly beside him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Ethan was not only an incredible father to Liam, but he had also transformed into a man dedicated to bringing hope to others. The small town of Vermont, once quiet and peaceful, now had a family filled with love and purpose. Elise continued her work at the local pediatric clinic, while Ethan balanced his time between overseeing the foundation and tending to their beloved garden. Together, they organized small charity events, inviting families with sick children to share meals, exchange stories, and find solace in one another's experiences. Each smile they witnessed brought immeasurable joy to both Ethan and Elise. One afternoon, as they sat in their garden watching the sun dip behind the trees, Ethan looked at Elise and said softly, I never thought I'd fall in love with Vermont like this. But maybe it's not about the place. It's because of you. Elise smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder, feeling an overwhelming sense of contentment. They had endured so much pain, yet in the end, they had found their way back to each other in the most peaceful chapter of their lives. As time passed, their lives settled into a steady rhythm. Liam was accepted into a prestigious medical school, and every day he pursued his studies with unwavering dedication and gratitude. He knew that without the love and sacrifice of his parents, he wouldn't have had the chance to stand where he was today. One crisp autumn morning, Elise and Ethan sat on the wooden bench on their front porch, watching the golden leaves gently fall to the ground. Ethan set down his cup of coffee and turned to look deeply into Elise's eyes. Elise, do you regret coming back to me? He asked quietly. Elise smiled, her gaze soft and filled with warmth. No, Ethan. I only regret that it took us so long to realize that true love never fades. No matter what happens, no matter how many years pass, if we hold on to faith and are willing to forgive, love will always find its way back. Ethan tightened his grip on her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. He knew he was the luckiest man in the world to have her by his side. At that moment, they both realized that happiness was not in the grand moments, but in the quiet, everyday joys they now shared. A happiness built on love, forgiveness, and second chances. Peaceful afternoons passed by with laughter and heartfelt conversations about life. Ethan learned to enjoy a slower pace, no longer caught up in the pressures of work, and devoted his entire heart to his family. One day, Liam returned home from university, bringing along photographs from the hospital where he was interning. Mom, Dad, look at these children. I see myself in each of their eyes. Ethan and Elise looked at the pictures, faces filled with resilience and hope. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder and said softly, You're doing something incredible, Liam. I'm so proud of you. Beside them, their little garden remained lush and green, and the ring on Elise's finger sparkled under the sunlight. It was a symbol of a love that had endured countless storms yet remained intact, stronger than ever. Their story stood as a testament to the idea that true love never disappears. It may be tested, it may go astray, but as long as both hold on to faith, it will always find its way back. The greatest lesson Ethan and Elise had learned from their journey wasn't about loss, but about cherishing what they had, learning to let go of the past and building a future filled with trust and hope. They found happiness not in grand gestures, but in the simplest of moments, sharing dinners together, watching the sunrise in the mornings, and most importantly, in finding each other again. Outside, the gentle winter breeze whispered through the garden, But inside their small home, the atmosphere was warm and filled with love. Thank you for listening to this story. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share,